Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. You may or may not realize that there's value in the ability to say no at work. One may even say that being able to say no at work and doing so artfully and purposefully can contribute to one's success. When it comes to saying no at work, the question is, why is it so difficult for us to do so? And why is it necessary that we do say no in terms of our success at work? One of the more common reasons why people would refrain from saying no at work, or maybe are even afraid to say no at work, is for the fear of damaging their reputation. The other thing is that people may hesitate to say no because they think it will hurt their opportunities for advancement within that company, within that department, or in terms of their career in general. But always saying yes at work comes with a hefty price. If you are reluctant or unable to or unwilling to say no at work, it won't be long before you find yourself being overworked or stretched too thin or unable to complete all of the tasks and requests that come your way. In some cases, you may not be able to complete them at all. In other cases, you may not be able to complete them to the standards that you hold for yourself or to the standards that the organization has. In short, not being able to say no at work can lead to stress, anxiety, and burnout. Along with all of that come things such as decreased productivity, a decrease in motivation, inability to focus, and not being able to be fully engaged at work. It's not difficult to understand why it's critical for everybody to be able to say no to a request at work at some point. But as I alluded to earlier, there is an art to saying no at work. We want to do so sparingly, of course. We don't want to take advantage of learning how to say no and then saying no to everything. It has to be done skillfully and artfully. So it needs to be done in a way where it's obviously done as necessary, but it also has to be done in a way that's professional and respectful, in a way that does not burn bridges or create problems in the now and for the future. One way of being able to say no at work without damaging relationships with others at work is to set clear boundaries. And while everybody's ability for boundary setting will be a little bit different depending on their position within the organization, depending on their level of responsibilities, but the bottom line is that everybody is able to say boundaries and then say no as needed within those boundaries. The boundaries need to be clear, and it's something that you need to stick with over time. If you set boundaries or your own rules, but then keep breaking them or changing them, that sends a message of ambiguity and confusion to others around you. You can't really expect others to know what your boundaries are if you are not clear about them. Again, it's important to stay professional, but also be firm. Don't let others push you or bully you or nag you into changing your mind and saying yes, or agreeing to something that you really can't afford to do, don't have the time, energy, or resources to do. There's also a way of saying yes with conditions that is closer to a no. So when a straight up clear no is not an option, in those instances, you can use phrases such as yes and, or yes but, or yes if. And then you fill in the blank that would bring on another condition to your agreement. And usually that condition is something that you would request from the person making that request of you or asking you to do something, or the company itself, or maybe others within the company. It may be a request to change the terms or the deadline, something that allows you to still say yes, but not be so burdened by having said yes. For example, you might say yes, but I can't get it done in the time that you expect me to finish the project, which then opens up the discussion for things such as maybe you need longer in terms of time, maybe you need an extension, maybe you need help from others to help you finish the task or finish the project as a collective. So there are ways of getting around things when it's difficult to say no as a straight up no, no way, not going to happen type of answer. You can always tell people that while you appreciate them thinking of you for a certain task or project, you are simply at your capacity at the moment and therefore would not be able to dedicate the kind of time and effort that the project or the task requires. That's a nice way of saying no while remaining professional and friendly and not burning bridges or damaging relationships. Something else that I touched upon earlier when it comes to your individual ability to exercise your right to say no at work. Please remember to use your no, your newly found skill, responsibly. Just because you get good at saying no doesn't mean that you should say no to everything. After all, everyone is at work to accomplish certain things. The ability to say no comes in handy and is critical, really, when it starts to go beyond your capacity, where it starts to stress you out and potentially leads to burnout. It's important to have a balance, not only a work-life balance, something which I've talked about in the past, but it's also to have a balance while at work. And taking on any and every task or responsibility or project that comes your way is not a way to keep a healthy balance at work. This is where that art and the skill of learning how to say no comes in very handy and is very important to your well-being and to your success at work and within the company. When it comes to saying no at work, the responsibility is not only that of the individual employee. Employers have a big part to play here as well. Whether we're talking about the organization or about those in leadership and management positions, the employer can make a big difference in individual employees' ability to say no to things that they simply cannot do. First and foremost, as an employer, you absolutely have to empower your individual employees to say no. Saying no should never be done in fear of retribution or in fear of being passed over for promotions or other advancements. Make sure that those in leadership and management positions are also conveying the message of how important it is for employees to set boundaries. And one good way to do that is to lead by example. Just as we should not expect employees to say yes to anything and everything that is asked of them, and just as we should recognize their right to work at a comfortable pace with a comfortable workload, the same is true for those in management and leadership positions. The company has the responsibility to make it acceptable and to normalize the ability to say no. And remember that all too often, the most competent of employees tend to get the most put on their plate. Let's make sure competence is not punished by too much work. A safe environment and open communication are critical in this situation. Employees must be able to communicate openly and freely, and they must feel safe to do so. This is how employees will learn that it's okay to say no if they are at capacity and simply cannot take on another responsibility, task, or project. Another way that the organization can promote this idea of employees being able to say no is by simply showing respect and highlighting the value of people's ability to do so. So rather than making it something negative or shameful or something that may backfire down the road, being able to say no is simply part of self-care and good management of time and responsibilities, and it should be recognized as such. In so many work cultures, people wear their stress and overwork as a badge of honor, and that's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. Instead, we should be praising and assigning value to the ability to say no when an employee has too much on their plate. It's not difficult to understand that if an employee is overworked, the quality of their work may suffer, their well-being will suffer, the balance at work and between their work life and personal life will likely suffer. But if they're able to have a more balanced experience at work, if they're able to say no, what they produce, what they contribute is likely to be of higher quality. And in some businesses, in some industries, that could mean millions of dollars, that could mean life or death. Let's make that change where we no longer glorify being overworked and overburdened at work, but rather recognize the value and the intelligence of being able to set limits, set boundaries, and the ability to say no when appropriate. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Saying no at work can be difficult for many people. It can be seen as a potential roadblock to one's success in their career, or even as a way of damaging their reputation. But the reality is that always saying yes to every request, every task, every bit of responsibility can backfire. From low motivation and decreased productivity to stress, anxiety, and burnout. Not being able to say no comes with a high price. Individuals will do well by setting clear boundaries. It's also important that you remain professional and firm, but also pay attention to your relationships with others so that you don't damage them by saying no. Another option is to say yes under certain conditions. That could afford you extended deadlines, additional resources, or other help in order to complete a project or a task. And of course, you can always say that you are at capacity and simply wouldn't be able to give the kind of time and attention to the request that it needs. Employers have an opportunity to make saying no acceptable and even valued at the workplace. It's about clear communications and expectations that people do have their limits and should be able to voice as much. A safe environment that allows for open communications is a great start. Being able to say no at work while remaining professional and while not damaging any relationships is a skill and an art, but one that can definitely be learned. Both employers and employees have much to offer and much to gain when the ability to say no is recognized and valued within a company. And remember, being able to say no comes with its own responsibility. Make sure you do it for the right reasons and at the right time. It's not a power to be abused. As this week unfolds, I encourage you to explore your own abilities to say no at work. Is your employer more open to your honest feedback in terms of your ability to perform certain tasks or take on more responsibilities? Or is that a struggle for you? And how do you do with that personally? Are you skilled and able to say no to things while remaining professional and keeping your relationships intact? What could you take away from this episode to improve your own skills, both as an employee and as an employer? For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While there, check out some of the other videos which focus on stress management. So, check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.